Purport, in Bhagavad Gita 3:35 it is said, Shreyan swadharmo viganaha paradharma swanushtita. It is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though they may be faulty, than another's duties. The antyajas, the men of the lower classes, are accustomed to stealing, drinking, and illicit sex, but that is not considered sinful. For example, if a tiger kills a man, that is not sinful, but if a man kills another man, this is considered sinful, and the killer is hanged. What is a daily affair among the animals is a sinful act in human society. Thus, according to the symptoms of higher and lower sections of society, there are different varieties of occupational duties, according to the experts in Vedic knowledge. These duties are prescribed in terms of the age considered. 32. If one acts in his profession according to his position in the modes of nature, and gradually gives up these activities, he attains the nishkama stage. Purport, if one gradually gives up his hereditary customs and duties and tries to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his natural position, he is gradually able to become free from these activities, and he attains the stage of nishkama, freedom from material desires. Texts 33 and 34. My dear king, if an agricultural field is cultivated again and again, the power of its production decreases, and whatever seeds are sown there are lost. Just as drops of ghee on a fire never extinguish the fire, but a flood of ghee will, similarly, overindulgence in lusty desires mitigates such desires entirely. Purport, if one continuously sprinkles drops of ghee on a fire, the fire will not be extinguished, but if one suddenly puts a lump of ghee on a fire, the fire may possibly be extinguished entirely. Similarly, those who are too sinful and have thus been born in the lower classes are allowed to enjoy sinful activities fully, for thus there is a chance that these activities will become detestful to them, and they will get the opportunity to be purified. Yasya ya lakshanam proktam pumsam varnabhyabdanshakam yadanyatrapi dushyeta tatenaiva vanirdishet. If one shows the symptoms of being a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Shudra, as described above, even if he has appeared in a different class, he should be accepted according to those symptoms of classification. Purport, herein it is clearly stated by Narada Muni that one should not be accepted as a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Shudra according to birth, for although this is going on now, it is not accepted by the Shastras. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 4.13, Chaturvanyam mayashrishtam gunakarma vibhagashaha. Thus the four divisions of society, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, are to be ascertained according to the qualities and activities. If one was born in a Brahmana family and has acquired the Brahminical qualifications, he is to be accepted as a Brahmana. Otherwise, he should be considered a Brahma Bandhu. Similarly, if a Shudra acquires the qualities of a Brahmana, although he was born in a Shudra family, he is not a Shudra because he has developed the qualities of a Brahmana. He should be accepted as a Brahmana. The Krishna consciousness movement is meant to develop these Brahminical qualities. Regardless of the community in which one was born, if one develops the qualities of a Brahmana, he should be accepted as a Brahmana, and he then may be offered the order of sannyas. Unless one is qualified in terms of the Brahminical symptoms, one cannot take sannyas. In designating a person a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Shudra, birth is not the essential symptom. This understanding is very important. Here Narada Muni distinctly says that one may be accepted according to the caste of his birth if he has the corresponding qualifications, but otherwise he should not. One who has attained the qualifications of a Brahmana, regardless of where he was born, should be accepted as a Brahmana. Similarly, if one has developed the qualities of a Shudra or a Chandala, regardless of where he was born, he should be accepted in terms of those symptoms. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 7th canto, 11th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled The Perfect Society for Social Classes. Bravo. Bravissimo. Sadhu, sadhu. It just reminded me of the ending of this chapter of the way the Hari Bhakti Vilas gives the various times and places and circumstances under which a diksha should or should not take place. For instance, there are certain days that you shouldn't give diksha, certain places you shouldn't give diksha. But at the end of the whole thing, Sanatana Goswami says that actually whenever the guru decides is time for diksha, that's the best time. And similarly, there's a lot of considerations here about the various divisions. But at the very end, Saved by the Bell, there's this advice, not vice, admonition that one must consider now what the quality of the person is and what they've developed, not how they've been born. It changes everything in the context of the way most people understand these parameters of Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, and so forth. Yes, Prabhu? There is a mic, and we'd like to give it to you now.
I was just curious about this. It's very interesting that for certain members of society, there's actually an allocation for sinful activities. That as they don't get the same sinful reactions that somebody in a higher class would, or any. I don't know if I understood that correctly, but what exactly is the qualifying division? It seems like it's also said, right, that one who's in knowledge, the reactions are stronger. Is that the kind of the barometer that however much knowledge you have, then therefore, if you're just in complete ignorance of Shudra, you don't know anything, or no, Shudras have to be good. But
yeah, that's pretty much it. You know, my godbrother and good friend, Paramahamsa, he took sannyas early on. He and Parvajrakacharya in Vrindavan. And he told me, once he was talking to Prabhupada, Prabhupada's father used to give a hookah to sadhus who would come. He would invite every kind of sadhu to come to his house. As you probably noticed here in Vrindavan, a lot of the sadhus take in copious amounts of cannabis. They'll sit under the tree and just, smoke all day long, some of them. And so, when sadhus would come, he would give them, he kept some so that he could give them whatever they wanted when they'd come over. And so they were asking, Paramahamsa was asking Prabhupada about that. And he said, oh yeah, Prabhupada said these sadhus, Paramahamsas, sometimes they'll take this. And then, but then he looked at him, his name was Paramahamsa, but not this Paramahamsa. In other words, he could tell what he was thinking. like, hey, this is for sadhus, right? It's easy to take advantage of these loopholes. This is what Narada Muni was telling Vyasadeva in the 5th chapter of the 1st canto, that if you give any of these loopholes, then everyone will take advantage of them. Like the time that Prabhupada had a glass of 7-Up, and then 2 weeks later there were 7-Up trucks pulling up to temples everywhere, unloading kegs of it. You were going to say?
Just riding on the coattails of that comment, I was reminded of the 5th canto, where there's a particular punishment for those who choose to remain in Shudra life and don't try to elevate themselves.
Good.
Which helped me to understand that the whole point of the thing is to get elevated.
Yeah.
It's not to stay where you are.
It's similar to the seventh offense, the holy name. If you know what it is and you take advantage of it as a loophole, then you become more implicated. It's considered devious. There's not good faith. You're not doing it in good faith. If you're just ignorant and you can't get out of it, then there's some provision. It's so liberal. I mean, it goes to this extreme that goes, okay, you're totally addicted to this, so then maybe this could help you. Was there a couple more points, then we'll move on? 1, 2, 3.
I've thought of this before a lot, like especially in regards to like my family and like the activities they've done. Especially I think of like my grandma. She's like lived her whole life a certain way, and then like eating cows every day, and like to what extent does she know how bad she's doing? And like she seems like, I mean, she's just a gentle, nice person, somewhat pious, but there's just like this complete ignorance of the fact of what is sinful. So it seems like it wouldn't be fair to like have such extreme reactions to someone who just doesn't know.
That was mentioned in the 5th canto when we got into the hellish planets. There were some considerations of gradations of sinful activities, and according to that, there were various accommodations made for people in their reformation. The ultimate idea is that there's no inordinate punishment. It's all ultimately meant for the person's betterment and refinement. That's one thing. And the other is that it's perfectly administered. Because Yamaraj, as we heard, is tied into he's so empowered by Krishna that he knows the psychic movements of the living entities, almost like the super soul said. So he has a feeling for what people's mentalities are. And it's not just meant for automatic punishment, but it's meant really for sensitivity training so that they can better themselves ultimately. Last point? Yes, Prabhu.
It's a question. In terms of the Varnashrama being applied in our society, because often I hear that Prabhupada left half of the work, and that means implementing Varnashram. Besides, cultivating qualities as personal character development, all those connected with social system, like levying taxes by Kshatriyas or Brahmanas, living by collecting grains, how practical is and what does it mean in practice to implement it in
Well, first
society?
of all, where did you hear about the 50%?
I can't remember now, but I heard it many times, and I've never found a reference.
That's to verify such things for yourself.
Yeah, I've never found any reference.
Okay. And not only to verify the statement, but also the context, and make sure that it's applied with the amount of weight that it's supposed to be. I mean, a lot of times Prabhupada gives instructions because it's imperative that things get done, and then you also have to see in comparison with other instructions, when it's supposed to be done at the cost of what are the things that's supposed to be done. That was only half of what you said, though, but I think I have a sneaking hunch that Kesava Bharati Maharaj wants to answer the second part.
I was going to say that...
Could we be collecting grains in the marketplace?
Well, following up what you just said, there's many places in which Srila Prabhupada said that it's not really possible to follow strictly according to the Vedic culture now in the present age. So if we think that we have to follow everything or else it's all or nothing, it's not like that. Prabhupada was very pragmatic, very practical, and he often said to us, we make the best use out of a bad bargain kind of thing, and he would adjust certain things, he saw the Western culture and how different it was, and he would adjust certain things. He would bend certain things, but he wouldn't break the basic core principles. But he would adjust things according to time and circumstance and the personality's ability to follow.
I just say also that if Prabhupada gave an instruction, then it's important for us to brainstorm and figure out how to apply it.
Yeah.
He might not have given a lot of details, because maybe he didn't have enough time, but if the instruction is there, then there's a way to implement it. And some of these are a little harder than others, and especially given the time, place, and circumstance, we may not be able to do it right away. But if we don't discard it and say it's impossible, since he already said it, and we look into it as much as we can, and try to do to the degree that we can, then at some point we'll get the facility and the intelligence to do it. So I think it's
Another point is the two discussions that I remember Prabhupada had where he directly addressed these kinds of questions with his senior people, and it was, I think it was 1975 or 76 in Mayapur, and then Vrindavan morning walks, the famous Varnashram college discussions. And Prabhupada kept bringing it back to the fact that once a person becomes a Vaishnava, meaning initiated by a bona fide spiritual master and following the basic principles of Krishna consciousness, then that person is above the varnas and ashrams. But we may act according to our propensity in order to organize ourselves structurally in society, but we shouldn't see ourselves as being Shudras and Brahman, in those designations. A Vaishnava is actually above the modes of nature. Because that's what Vaisesika was saying, that Prabhupada said things in such a way as to not allow our minds to go to extremes where we might start to categorize one another and see higher and lower and treat one another in that kind of discriminatory way that's actually going on in human society now, on the plea of, us following a structured system or a hierarchical system. Okay. Chapter 12, the perfect society, 4 spiritual classes. Text 1. Narada Muni said, a student should practice completely controlling his senses. He should be submissive and should have an attitude of firm friendship for the spiritual master. With a great vow, the brahmachari should live at the Gurukula only for the benefit of the Guru. Text 2. At both junctions of day and night, namely in the early morning and the evening, he should be fully absorbed in thoughts of the spiritual master, fire, the sun god, and Lord Vishnu, and by chanting the Gayatri mantra, he should worship them. 3. Being called by the spiritual master, the student should study the Vedic mantras regularly. Every day, before beginning his studies, or at the end of his studies, the disciple should every day, before beginning his studies, and at the end of his studies, the disciple should respectfully offer obeisances unto the spiritual master. Text 4. Carrying pure kusha grass in his hand, the brahmachari should dress regularly with a belt of straw and with deerskin garments. He should wear matted hair, carry a rod and water pot, and be decorated with a sacred thread as recommended in the Shastras. So this is one example of something that we might not want to apply rigidly in our brahmachari ashrams based on obvious principles. Deerskin. Text 5. The brahmachari should go out morning and evening to collect alms, and he should offer all that he collects to the spiritual master. He should eat only if ordered to take food by the spiritual master. Otherwise, if the spiritual master does not give this order, he may sometimes have to fast. Today we have our bell. Ding, 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 ding. Yeah. Text 6. A brahmachari should be quite well behaved and gentle, and should not eat or collect more than necessary. He must always be active and expert, fully believing in the instructions of the spiritual master and the Shastra. Fully controlling his senses, he should associate only as much as necessary with women or those controlled by women. Purport. A brahmachari should be very careful not to mix with women or with men addicted to women. Although when he goes out to beg alms, it is necessary to talk with women and with men very much attached to women, this association should be very short, and he should talk with them only about begging alms and not more. A brahmachari should be very careful in associating with men who are attached to women. Prabhupada used to say, it's more or less like pass the salt relationship. Text 7. Pass the salt. It's something it's a social thing that everybody does with one another, but it doesn't go any further than passing the salt. Translation. Text 7. A brahmachari, or one who has not accepted the grihastha ashram, family life, must rigidly avoid talking with women or about women, for the senses are so powerful that they may agitate even the mind of a sannyasi, a member of the renounced order of life. Purport. Brahmacharya essentially means the vow not to marry, but to observe strict celibacy, brihadvrata. A brahmacharya or sannyasi should avoid talking with women or reading literature concerning talks between man and woman. The injunction restricting association with women is the basic principle of spiritual life. Associating or talking with women is never advised in any of the Vedic literatures. The entire Vedic system teaches one to avoid sex life so that one may gradually progress from brahmacharya to grihastha, from grihastha to vanaprastha, and from vanaprastha to sannyas, and then give up material enjoyment, which is the original cause of bondage to this material world. The word brihadvrata refers to one who has decided not to marry, or in other words, not to indulge in sex life throughout his entire life. Text 8. If the wife of the spiritual master is young, a young brahmachari should not allow her to take care for his hair, to massage his body with oil, or bathe him with affection like a mother. Purport. The relationship between the student or disciple and the wife of the spiritual master or teacher is like that between son and mother. A mother sometimes cares for her son by combing his hair, massaging his body with oil, or bathing him. Similarly, the wife of the teacher is also a mother, Guru Patni, and therefore she may also care for the disciple in a motherly way. If the wife of the teacher is a young woman, however, a young brahmachari should not allow such a mother to touch him. This is strictly prohibited. There are 7 kinds of mothers. Atmamatta Guru Patni, Brahmani Rajapatnika, Denu Datri Tata Prithvi, Saptaita Mataraksmitaha. These mothers are the original mother, the wife of the teacher or spiritual master, the wife of a brahmana, the king's wife, the cow, the nurse, and the earth. Unnecessary association with women, even with one's mother, sister, or daughter, is strictly prohibited. This is human civilization. A civilization that allows men to mix unrestrictedly with women is an animal civilization. In Kali Yuga, people are extremely liberal, but mixing with women and talking with them as equals actually constitutes an uncivilized way of life. Text 9. Woman is compared to fire, and man is compared to a butter pot. Therefore, a man should avoid associating even with his own daughter in a secluded place. Similarly, he should also avoid association with other women. One should associate with women only for important business and not otherwise. Purport. If a butter pot and fire are kept together, the butter within the pot will certainly melt. Woman is compared to fire, and man is compared to a butter pot. However advanced one may be in restraining the senses, it is almost impossible for a man to keep himself controlled in the presence of a woman, even if she is his own daughter, mother, or sister. Indeed, his mind is agitated, even if one is in the renounced order of life. Therefore, Vedic civilization carefully restricts mingling between men and women. If one cannot understand the basic principle of restraining association between man and woman, he is to be considered an animal. That is the purport of this verse. Text 10. As long as a living entity is not completely self-realized, as long as he is not independent of the misconception of identifying with his body, which is nothing but a reflection of the original body and senses, he cannot be relieved of the conception of duality, which is epitomized by the duality between man and woman. Thus, there is every chance that he will fall down because his intelligence is bewildered. Purport. Here is another important warning that a man must save himself from attraction to women. Unless one is self-realized, fully independent of the illusory conception of the material body, the duality of man and woman must undoubtedly continue. But when one is actually self-realized, this distinction ceases. Vidyavanaya sampane, brahmane gavihastane, shuni chaiva shapake cha, panditak samadarshinaha. The humble sage, by virtue of true knowledge, sees with equal vision a learned and gentle brahmana, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog-eater, outcast. On the spiritual platform, the learned person not only gives up the duality of man and woman, but also gives up the duality of man and animal. This is the test of self-realization. One must realize perfectly that the living being is spirit soul, but is tasting various types of material bodies. One may theoretically understand this, but when one has practical realization, then he actually becomes a pandit, one who knows. Until that time, the duality continues, and the conception of man and woman also continues. And in this stage, one should be extremely careful about mixing with women. No one should think himself perfect and forget the Shastric injunction that one should be very careful about associating even with his daughter, mother, or sister, not to speak of other women. Srila Madhvacharya cites the following shlokas in this regard. Bahut venai vadastunam yatartam jnanamuchyate advaita jnanam etyetad dvaita jnanam tadanyata yata jnanam tata vastus tata mati naivajik tata ekatra vedanam. Only unity, unity and variety is real knowledge, and therefore giving up variety artificially does not reflect perfect knowledge of monism. According to the Achintya Bheda philosophy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, there are varieties, but all of them constitute one unit. Such knowledge is knowledge of perfect oneness. I have an offering from Gopi Paradalata Prabhu in this regard. I heard him say one time about oneness and merging. He said, spiritual realization means to merge into the unity of spiritual variety. Oh no, merging into the oneness of spiritual variety. Pretty good.
Cool. 11. All the rules and regulations apply equally to the householder and the sannyasi, the member of the renounced order of life. We really got an upgrade on the sound system, didn't we? Who would have thought it was all because it was all the way in the back room this whole time? Now it's out here. We should put it on the roof and let people in the neighborhood have a little taste. All the rules and regulations apply equally to the householder and the sannyasi, the member of the renounced order of life. The grihastha, however, is given permission by the spiritual master to indulge in sex during the period favorable for procreation. Purport: it is sometimes misunderstood that a grihastha, a householder, is permitted to indulge in sex at any time. This is a wrong conception of grihastha life. In spiritual life, whether one is a grihastha, vanaprastha, sannyasi, or brahmachari, everyone is under the control of the spiritual master. The brahmacharis and sannyasis there are strong. For brahmacharis and sannyasis, there are strong restrictions on sexual indulgence. Similarly, there are strong restrictions for grihasthas. Grihasthas should indulge in sex only in accordance with the order of the Guru. Therefore, it is mentioned here that one must follow the orders of the spiritual master. Guru vrata vikalpena. When the spiritual master orders, the grihastha may accept sex life. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 7:11. Dharma vidodho bhuteshu kamosmi. Indulgence in sex life without disobedience to the religious rules and regulations constitutes a religious principle. The grihastha is allowed to indulge in sex life during the period favorable for procreation and in accordance with the spiritual master's order. If the spiritual master's orders allow a grihastha to engage in sex life at a particular time, then the grihastha may do so. Otherwise, if the spiritual master orders against it, the grihastha should abstain. The grihastha must obtain permission from the spiritual master to observe the ritualistic ceremony of Govardhana samskara. Then he may approach his wife to beget children, otherwise not. A brahmana generally remains a brahmachari throughout his entire life, but although some brahmanas become grihasthas and indulge in sex life, they do so under the complete control of the spiritual master. The kshatriya is allowed to marry more than one wife, but this also must be in accordance with the instructions of a spiritual master. It is not that because one is a grihastha, he may marry as many times as he likes and indulge in sex life as he likes. This is not spiritual life. In spiritual life, one must conduct one's whole life under the guidance of the Guru. Only one who executes his spiritual life under the direction of the spiritual master can achieve the mercy of Krishna. Yasya prasadat bhagavat prasada. If one desires to advance in spiritual life, but he acts whimsically, not following the order of the spiritual master, he has no shelter. Yasya prasada nagati kutopi. Without the spiritual master's order, even the grihastha should not indulge in sex life. 12. Brahmacharis or grihasthas who have taken the vow of celibacy as described above should not indulge in the following: applying powder or ointment to the eyes, massaging the head with oil, massaging the body with the hands, seeing a woman or painting a woman's picture, eating meat, drinking wine, decorating the body with flower garlands, smearing scented ointment on the body, or decorating the body with ornaments. These should be given up. 14. According to the rules and regulations mentioned above, one who is twice born, namely a brahmana, kshatriya, or vaishya, should reside in the Gurukula under the care of the spiritual master. There he should study and learn all the Vedic literatures along with their supplements and the Upanishads according to his ability and power to study. If possible, the student or disciple should reward the spiritual master with the remuneration the spiritual master requests. And then, following the master's order, the disciple should leave and accept one of the other ashramas, namely the grihastha ashrama, vanaprastha ashrama, or the sannyasa ashrama, as he desires. Purport: to study the Vedas and understand them, of course, requires some special intelligence, but the members of the three higher sections of society, namely the brahmanas, kshatriyas, and vaishyas, must learn the Vedic literatures according to their capability and power to understand. In other words, studying the Vedic literatures is compulsory for everyone but the Shudras and Antyajas. The Vedic literature gives the knowledge that can lead one to understand the absolute truth, Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagavan. Gurukula, or the Reformation educational institution, should be, what's that? Gurukula, or the reformatory educational institution, should be used only to understand Vedic knowledge. At the present time, there are many educational institutions for training in technology, but such knowledge has nothing to do with understanding of the absolute truth. Technology, therefore, is meant for the Shudras, whereas the Vedas are meant for the Dvijas. Consequently, this verse states, Dvijo Dvityava Bhudyacha Trayim Sango Panishadam. At the present time, in the age of Kali, practically everyone is a Shudra and no one is a Dvija. Therefore, the condition of society has very much deteriorated. Another point to be observed from this verse is that from the Brahmacharya ashrama, one may accept the sannyasa ashrama, vanaprastha ashrama, or grihastha ashrama. It is not compulsory for a brahmachari to become a grihastha. Because the ultimate aim is to understand the absolute truth, there is no necessity of going through all the different ashramas. Thus, one may proceed to the sannyasa ashrama directly from the brahmacharya ashrama. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur accepted the sannyas ashrama directly from the brahmachari ashrama. In other words, His Divine Grace, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur did not think it compulsory to accept the grihastha ashram or vanaprastha ashrama. 15. One should realize that in the fire, in the spiritual master, in oneself, and in all living entities, in all circumstances and conditions, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, has simultaneously entered and not entered. He is situated eternally and internally. He is situated externally and internally as the full controller of everything. Purport. Realization of the Supreme Personality of Godhead's omnipresence is the perfect realization of the absolute truth to be attained through the study of the Vedic literatures. As stated in the Brahma Samhita 535, Andantarasta Panamanuchayantarastam, the Lord is situated within the universe, within the heart of every living entity, and also within the atom. We should understand that whenever the Supreme Personality of God is present, He is present with all His paraphernalia, including His name, form, associates, and servants. The living entity is part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and thus one should understand that since the Supreme Lord has entered the atom, the living entities are also there. One must accept the inconceivable quality of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, for no one can understand from the material point of view how the Lord is all-pervasive and yet situated in His own abode, Goloka Vrindavan. This realization is possible if one strictly follows the regulative principles of ashrama, brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyas. Srila Madhvacharya says in this regard, Pravishta sarvagata pravishta tvanurupavan evam dvi rupa bhagavan hare eko janardana. The Supreme Personality of Godhead in His original form has not entered everything, apravishtaha, but in His impersonal form He has entered, pravishtaha. Thus He has entered and not entered simultaneously. This is also explained in Bhagavad Gita 9.4, wherein the Lord says, Maya tatamidang sarvam jagadavyakta murtina matstani sarva bhutani nachaham te shavashtitaha. By me and my unmanifested form, the entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I am not in them. The Lord can defy Himself. Thus, there is variety in unity. Ekatvam bahutvam. Bahutvam. It's interesting. There's a small change here.
Here it says, the Lord is present everywhere, but still everything is not within Him. Thus, there is unity in variety. Ekatvam bahutvam. That's right. This is what happens after the verse. The Lord is present everywhere, but still everything is not within Him. Thus there is unity in variety. Ekatvam bahutvam. Pretty clear, if you ask me. Of course you can't change anything, but...
Yeah.
The Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada mentions in purport that sarvagata should not be taken, that the living entity is, each living entity is not all pervasive and everywhere. But in this purport, it's a little bit, he says that one should understand that since the Supreme Lord has entered the atom, the living entities are also there. So is the purport to that statement the same as what Prabhupada says in the Bhagavad Gita, that about the living entities not being all pervasive or not being everywhere, like each individual living entity? Or is it saying that since the Lord is there, then the living entities are part of Him, so they're also there as part of His body or something like that? Or I'm probably reading too much into it.
Did you see that? Did you see what just happened? I was looking to him, and he was looking to me. It's like a hot potato. No, I heard, I just, by coincidence or arrangement, I just listened to a morning walk in which Tamal Krishnamurti asked exactly the same question. Somebody asked him that question, and he couldn't answer it. And Prabhupada, his question was even deeper than your question. He was asking, well, if the soul is in the atom, then, and the presence of the soul means consciousness, and when the body that the soul's occupying breaks up, so then he's saying, what happens does that mean that the atom breaks up and frees the soul, and Prabhupada didn't answer it directly. There's certain things that you actually can't know. It's not that we can know everything. And he didn't answer that directly, but what he did say was something to the effect that you said, that because Krishna is there, the soul is there. But he's not there in the same way as he is conscious in becoming the conscious living being within a body, because there's portals that allows the consciousness to come out. It doesn't mean that the soul doesn't have consciousness, but contained within an atom, there's no vent for the consciousness to come out. So therefore it's different. It's not that the soul is an embodied soul in the atom exactly, because there's no senses, there's no avenue or way for the consciousness to come out. So in that sense it would lend itself to your idea that the soul is there because Krishna is there. It's not that he's there in order to be, a living being of the body, of the atom. That's what I understood from that conversation. Yes.
Regarding the last verses about associating with women, I'm having trouble, I guess, digesting it, and also in regards to the statements about the other aspects of varnashram, like the brahmachari details, wearing all these things, wearing things that we don't wear, so I guess it's challenging to see what to accept and what not to accept. How do we know for sure? In regards to this associating with women, a lot of I've heard, in especially like the 70s and 80s, when there was a firm position of associating with women, that a lot of problems came, like sannyasis doing things to women, or not just the fall downs, but I've heard stories of just being mean, basically being mean to the devotee women. So I'm wondering how to digest that in the application of these things.
There was a letter once that was written by Srila Prabhupada by a lady who brought up this point. And Prabhupada used the example that sometimes when a tree or a plant is very new, a sapling or a very new plant, then until the roots go into the ground, when it's planted, they have to put some kind of protective covering around it. So sometimes if a person is still agitated, but at the same time is trying to control the senses and is trying to be a brahmachari, sannyasi, then they may put up a protective shield by that kind of behavior, being too abrupt, or women spitting and things like that, or being rough or rude, and that's not proper. Prabhupada said very clearly that it's not proper. But he said to the lady who wrote the letter, he said, you should have compassion on them. They're trying to do something that's extremely difficult. When a Jamil fell down, he just happened to be walking through the forest on an order of his spiritual master and saw a Shudrani embracing to have sex, and he couldn't get out of his mind. Then he ended up, doing all those things. And Prabhupada said, but in this age, all you have to do is walk out the door, and sometimes not even walking out the door, it's everywhere. And therefore, to restrain yourself under those conditions is extremely difficult. So Prabhupada would stress the importance of keeping oneself in the mode of goodness and keeping oneself absorbed in hearing and chanting, and with a taste that will allow one to recognize when that danger is there, and to be able to not go there. And in terms of if sannyasis acted improperly in the beginning, there was one point in 1976 where Prabhupada said, okay, enough sannyasis, because we could see that none of them are qualified. But at the same time, he gave those sannyasis sannyas because it was needed. It was needed for preaching and for pushing forward the movement. So these things can be adjusted, but they have to be adjusted with maturity and with spiritual knowledge, not just with knee-jerk kind of emotional, reaction. With maturity, with time, it'll be easier to understand. And the other thing is, it's not if a person does something wrong, it's how they respond. If a person does something wrong and then responds properly, then he becomes reinstated easily, especially when it comes to sensual things. Probably didn't take those things so seriously, but in our Western culture, we take that thing very seriously. So all these things have to be considered in a kind of holistic way, I guess you could say, so that we won't be disturbed by things that we see that aren't exactly according to what we read, etc., etc.
Notice that it's a general human tendency to get into a group, identify oneself with a group, and then exclude others. It happens in corporations too, because there's a lot of small companies within a big corporation, and it's actually a principle of management to make sure that those smaller units don't think they're the all in all, and then forget about the overall mission of the organization. And it's just, once we were playing a game at ISV as a break, we go for a picnic, and then we divide it into groups because we were going to go look for stuff like a scavenger hunt or something. It's just emphasizing working together, teamwork. And I saw, and as soon as the devotees got divided into their groups, then immediately they started identifying with the group. I mean, it was half in joking, but it's half serious too. And also, there was a study done at Stanford University about prisons, and they hired some people for it was people volunteered, maybe they gave them a little something. They were studying prison life. And they appointed some people, just whoever they were, to be the prison guards and other people to be the prisoners. And after half a week, or I forget the duration of time, they had to stop 3 weeks, they had to stop the experiment. Because the prison guards, so-called prison guards, were just playing a role. They became so overbearing with the prisoners that, they thought somebody might get killed. And so it's like a human tendency. And when we have this organization, and then you have these divisions within it, this person's a this person's a that, you have to be really careful not to get what they call in corporations called bounded rationality. When the one little unit within the company starts thinking like we're better than everybody else, accounting department, without us, no one could live. And so many of these problems happen because of the human tendency to just think that, whatever we're doing right now is the most important thing, whatever we are, our group, and things like that. And Prabhupada was constantly, working to make sure that devotees didn't think like that. For instance, there was that one incident in Berkeley where the devotees, they wouldn't let women in the temple room to chant because they said, they're bothering, if the women are in the same temple room with us chanting at the same time.
I remember that. That was San Francisco, wasn't
In
it?
San Francisco.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sridayananda was there in the room and he was representing them to Prabhupada. We were in the room together and that happened.
Oh, yeah, why don't you tell what happened?
Yeah, Prabhupada said, well, what we could do is we make it, a screen in the temple room, and then we could extend the screen to the doorway, and then we could extend the screen down the hallway, to the different ashrams, and that way you'd never have to look, at a woman. And then he looked at us and he said, but what happens when you walk out the door? And then he laughed.
When you walk out the door.
And then he just laughed. And he said, better you control your mind and senses. But I would like to say one thing about this. Go ahead.
Just that, it's always a balance, as Maharaj was saying, but he always tried to emphasize how that, in an organization like ours, we have to, that's one of the main jobs that we have, is to maintain that balance so people don't get into the bounded rationality phase and start breaking off into sectarian groups. Groups have to be there and they're natural, but if you make such strong distinctions between them and they can't interact properly, then you get an organization that gets stifled.
And we can't, if we forget that the various parts of the organization, or in this case, the parts of the social body, are meant to cooperate together to please Krishna. As soon as you take Krishna out of the center, and as soon as all the roles that we're playing, are not meant for pleasing Krishna, then those tendency for some group to come over the other group and exploit the other group for power or whatever the reason is. It's just another jargon, another way of saying what you just said in any organization. But the social body is the same. The brahmacharis in the Vedic culture, they were trained right from the get-go, from 5 years old, to go to door to door and say to every woman that came to the door, "Dear mother." And they just said it over and over again, their whole brahmachari life, "Dear mother, dear mother, dear mother." And by the time that came time for them to, go out into the world or whatever, become married, they had a completely different consciousness than those of us, raised in this culture. So there are problems that come, that weren't there when we were allowed to be, or when the social structure was there from the beginning of our lives, and all these things have to be taken into consideration. Yeah, let's hear it from the example.
You mentioned in the 70s and 80s, and in that time, most devotees were teenagers and in their 20s. There were a handful of devotees who were 30 or older. And as is sometimes the case, when you're a new devotee, you're fanatic. You're fanatic with your old friends, with your parents, with each other. And so we didn't have elders. Srila Prabhupada was our elder. And so now we have more of a society. We have more of a family atmosphere in some ways. And so while those things still can happen, they're less likely to happen because someone older and wiser is there to observe and can help to instruct. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, I think, when you say when there are communities that are well adjusted. That is like what I'm just taking off from what you're saying, and my observation is that, of course, our overall society is a series of small communities, smallish, sometimes small, but sometimes large also. But when those communities are well adjusted, and there's a sense of the proper protocol and how everyone interacts with one another, and not only that, when there are relationships that people can depend on with elders, with younger devotees, and there are good role models within that, then it tends to resist the tendency for people to become fanatical. And also it has to be engineered as well. I know I've heard things about Chopati. I haven't lived there, but I do know that because of Radhanath Maharaj's, when he took to management, he had already been through various experimental communities where people had done things that didn't work out so well. And I'm being very generous in saying that. And so, his idea was like, I'll do the opposite when I get there. Some of the ideas, that got inculcated into the community there was, if brahmacharis criticize grihastas, they have to leave the ashram. That was like a basic principle, because he saw that happened before, and it's based on what I said, bounded rationality. Brahmacharis are the best. Everybody else is in Maya. And if that kind of talk comes out, then it's like you're out. And when people understand in a community that is the proper conduct, to appreciate the others, to serve the others, to see them as superior and so forth, just like in the corporations, they have to do that too. It's a similar thing. Then if you emphasize that, and you have a community, then you find that it runs. And it takes work to not only engineer a community, but also to maintain it over a long period of time, to make sure that those things don't pop up. And they do. There's all kinds of people come into ISKCON from all kinds of backgrounds. Some of them are very conservative, some of them are more liberal. And living entities are living entities. Humans are humans. They do crazy stuff. They do the wrong stuff most of the time. And so you have to make up for that by having a really strong support system. And as Nirakulap was pointing out in the beginning, although we had a support system in one way, because Prabhupada was there, he was our nucleus, and we also had a lot of enthusiasm, there were a lot of the roles weren't there, and the checks and balances weren't completely ratified yet either. As devotees would just take one instruction over another and over-apply it, misapply it.
What to speak of the fact that in the beginning there weren't even books. There were no books. And we were flying by the seat of our pants, more or less, until the books came out. I would like to offer, if I may, with the permission of the chair, of shloka.
Please.
Thank you.
Permission granted.
This is a shloka given by Krishna.
I cede the remainder of my time to the gentleman from Oroville, California.
I wonder if it still exists. It's right down the street from Paradise.
Oh, that's not good.
Not very good. Anyway, whether it does or doesn't, here we are. Yes, Krishna says, Tadvidi panipatina pariprashnena sevya upadekshanti te jnanam. This is, by the way, not the verse that I want to enter. No, this is not the verse. This is the introduction. This is the run-up to the verse. Yeah, run-up. Don't give it away. And at the end of that verse it says, Tattvadarshana, a person that's self-realized can give you knowledge. And then the next verse says what that knowledge is. And this is the gateway to solving all those problems. Yajgyatva napunar moham evam yasasi pandava yena bhutanya sheshani drakshashat manyatomayi. So when you've received that knowledge, Krishna says, then you won't fall down again. Because you will see that every living being is but a part of the Supreme, or in other words, that they're mine. So if you're coming to get love of God and you're at least even aspiring, then if you begin to see through the vision that Krishna wants you to see, through that knowledge, then that will help a lot. When you see somebody that everything belongs to Krishna, and if you love Krishna, you attach to Krishna, you feel affection for Krishna, automatically that knowledge will temper those bad habits that we have from having been raised and developed so many bad habits.
One last point, and that is, Prabhu lived in LA for some time, on and off. He would stay there to translate, and he had his servant make lunch for him every day. And in Los Angeles, there was a little closet in Prabhupada's room, and in it he had a hot plate, and the servant, the cook, would cook in there. And somebody asked why that was. Shruti Kirti Prabhu explained that Prabhupada would send his brahmachari servant down to cook in the kitchen. There'd be, brahmacharini in there cutting vegetables or whatever, and then all of a sudden, blink, blink, and then, a couple days later, brahmachari was Prabhupada, I gotta go. Where are you going? I was like, you gotta get married. And, it happened so many times that he moved his cooking operation up into his room so the service wasn't interrupted. And I'm just saying this as a practical matter in balancing the conversation, because on the other side, what the Srimad Bhagavatam is saying is absolutely true, and the forces of nature are inexorable, especially when it comes to men being attracted to women and vice versa. And so one has to be very careful, even as we administer, ways in which the communities, we can all live together and serve together and everything like that. There has to be a pervading awareness of the fact that this kind of force applies to everybody, everywhere, at all times. This is what the Shastra, why the Shastra is saying it so emphatically. That, nobody's exempted from this, not even Brahma, as we find out. So
yes,
be careful. Thank you for joining us for the morning session. That brings our morning session to an end.
Wow.
We'll be joining back here again at 3:30, Krishna willing. Gaur Premanande. Ready? Everybody ready? Nitai Gaura Haribo, 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo, Nitai Gaura Haribo, 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo. Vanchakalpadurvishcha kripasundabhevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.